Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei of Iran has raised the bar, making a direct threat against the American aircraft carrier strike group for the first time. And alongside the talks, and under the shadow of Trump's threats, Iran also closed the Strait of Hormuz for a drill, in which the IRGC naval forces carried out missile launches and even simulated taking over an oil tanker, sending a signal that they are ready at any moment for war. For his part, President Trump threatened that Iran is not interested in bearing the consequences of failing to reach a deal. Now, the round of talks in Geneva has ended, and initial reports indicate that progress was made, but the Gerald Ford aircraft carrier is still on its way to the Middle East. Today, we will bring you all the details on the new proposal, and we will try to determine whether Iran is dragging out time in the negotiations with the United States, as an American source says that Iran will come back with answers within 2 weeks. However, the IDF's preparations indicate that something big is approaching. I'm Yair Pinto, and this is your Boots on the Ground report, bringing you the whole truth about what's happening in Israel and in the Middle East. And hours before another round of talks, this time in Geneva, the President of the United States was asked about the chances of success in the negotiations and chose to issue a warning that the talks will be very important. I hope they will be sensible, the Iranians. I don't think that they are interested in the consequences of not reaching an agreement. Even as the United States continues to beef up its forces facing Iran, Khamenei chose to threaten Trump with a new threat, one the likes of which has not been heard before. This time, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei directly threatened the United States military, and especially the American aircraft carriers that are already in the region, declaring that the strongest army in the world can sometimes take such a blow that it cannot recover from. More dangerous than the aircraft carrier is the weapon that can sink it down deep. After all of that, the second round of talks between Washington and Tehran opened in Geneva on Tuesday afternoon, and the Iranian diplomats claimed that they arrived with real and constructive proposals. But American officials said that the Iranians said they will return within the coming 2 weeks with detailed proposals to address some of the open gaps in our positions. That's not exactly the same thing, is it? What do you think? But meanwhile, against the backdrop of the talks in Geneva and Khamenei's threats against the United States, the Iranian news agency Fars reported that parts of the Strait of Hormuz would be closed for several hours on Tuesday afternoon due to a military drill. The Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps is trying to show that they fully control the Strait of Hormuz, and the move may have broad international economic implications. In Tehran, they are also repeating their red lines against talks about their ballistic missiles. And despite all of this, Tehran's foreign minister said that the current round was more successful than the previous one, and that the sides will work on draft agreements. He added that various ideas were raised, progress was made. That does not mean that we will reach an agreement soon, but the road has begun. TBN Israel's senior Middle East analyst Mati Shoshani will bring us a closer look today at what is behind the talks in Iran and why is the regime in Iran trying to buy time. Because while Tehran projected optimism, Israel's intelligence echelon believes the Americans are not optimistic at the end of the round of talks due to the regime's refusal to discuss missiles and the assistance of the proxy organizations, all the terror groups in this region. Iran's president, long thought as a relatively moderate guy, also said that the regime will never abandon the nuclear program because it is for peaceful purposes. And closer to home, the IDF is breaking Hezbollah down into components in Lebanon for the simple reason that we know Iran is planning to use Hezbollah to try and hit us in response to any military moves that the United States makes against the Ayatollah regime in Iran. Therefore, the IDF is increasing the pace of strikes on the Hezbollah terrorist positions in Lebanon, focusing on launchers and weapons depots, as officials in Lebanon's internationally recognized government hold intensive contacts with the United States to demand that it restrain Israel. In Gaza, Hamas is preparing for Ramadan, the Muslim holy month, deploying its police apparatus in central locations across the Gaza Strip in order to supervise goods in the markets. Hamas is also using the time to smuggle in fresh supplies of weapons and ammunition, repeating its refusal to disarm, as its motivation remains what it was. So as you can see, we have a lot to talk about today. So let's dive into the details. I'm Yair Pinto, with me is Shoshani, and this is your Boots on the Ground report, bringing you the whole truth about what's happening in Israel on day 864 of the war against Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, the Shia militias in Iraq, and all the other armed groups in this region that are operating under the control of the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps in Iran, which is the head of the crumbling axis of evil in the Middle East. And a moment before we start, I want to call on you to keep spreading the truth, share our content with as many people as possible, and if you want to see more, look for us on social media. Look for TBN Israel, for Yair Pinto, and for Shoshani. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button here on our channel, TBN Israel. On Tuesday afternoon, missiles were fired over the Strait of Hormuz, and at the same time there was a temporary closure of parts of the shipping route. This is not a theoretical event, but a live drill with real firing, ships at sea, and a clear message for anyone watching from afar, as the IRGC announced the drills hours in advance, arrogantly declaring that the area was closed, as if they own it. Tehran called the drill smart control, as the Revolutionary Guards fired live anti-ship missiles, and there was also a simulated takeover of an oil tanker. And all of this while in those exact same hours, the second round of negotiations between the United States and Iran is taking place in Geneva, mediated by Oman. And once again, all of this sends a clear message, because the Strait of Hormuz is a global choke point. About a fifth of global oil production passes through this route every 24 hours. And so, even a few hours of uncertainty, there are enough to move globally traded oil futures, and also the markets are changing based on what's happening. However, after the statements made by the diplomats for both sides in Geneva, oil prices fell slightly, although there's no way to know what will happen tomorrow, because if this is what Iran does while talks are taking place in Geneva, what is it preparing to do the moment the talks will fail? And with that question in mind, let's take a look at the timeline. First, the drill, then the talks, then the statements, and then more threatening messages. In Switzerland, the second round opened in an indirect format, as the talks are being held at the residence of Oman's envoy to the United Nations under heavy security, and the delegations are not sitting opposite each other in the same room directly. They are sending messages that are passed through the Omani mediators. America is represented by the White House Special Envoys Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, while on the Iranian side, Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi is leading. Even before the discussions, before they opened even, Araghchi also met with the head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Rafael Grossi, for a conversation about technical aspects of Iran's nuclear program. At the end of the day, Araghchi came out with a message of progress, so to speak, adding that the sides reached understandings on the central principles and that they will begin working on a draft agreement and exchanging documents. He also emphasized this does not mean we will reach an agreement soon. The path has begun, but it is still very long. From the American side, a similar message was conveyed. There is progress, but there is still a lot to discuss. But there is the critical detail in terms of timeline. According to the understanding that were conveyed after the round, the Iranians are supposed to return within 2 weeks with detailed proposals to narrow the gaps. But while in Geneva they talk about documents, in the Gulf they speak the language of power. For instance, Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei did not settle for general statements, but spoke directly about American aircraft carriers in this region and said that sentences that in the West were translated as sharp threats. He said that even the strongest army in the world can take a blow it will not recover from. and that more dangerous than the aircraft carrier is the weapon that can sink it deep. Clearly, Khamenei meant these words to provoke a reaction. So what is your reaction to what he said? Let me know what you think in the comment section. Do they have a weapon that can sink the aircraft carriers of the United States, or is he bluffing? The reaction of the United States military signals that they're not intimidated by Khamenei's words, as they are moving forward with plans to deploy even more offensive and defensive capabilities, including the aircraft carrier Gerald R. Ford, and its escorting destroyers, which can have strike capabilities. And at the same time, the United States deployed dozens of land-based aircrafts in the past 24 hours, including F-35s, F-22s, and F-16s. In addition, assets that had been stationed in Britain, including refueling aircrafts and additional planes, have been moved closer to the Middle East. There is also another layer: air defensive systems. The Americans continue to deploy defensive capabilities, and some of the units that were supposed to rotate out in this region were ordered to extend their stay. Military cargo movement was continuing, bringing on equipment from the United States to Jordan, to Bahrain, and to Saudi Arabia. And in satellite images, American F-15 fighter jets were also identified at the bases in Jordan since the end of January. This is how the United States is negotiating with a gun on the table and an entire fleet at sea. And for his part, President Trump himself combines diplomatic pressure with a clear threat. Before the renewal of the talks, he said that he would be involved indirectly and described the talks as very important, and then issued a warning. He hopes that the Iranians will be reasonable because he does not think that they want the consequences of failing to reach an agreement. He also brought a recent past event back into the picture when he spoke about how the Iranians refused to come to the deal last June, which forced him to send the B-2 bombers to hit the nuclear facilities, but he emphasized that he would rather not reach that decision point again, but it's up to the Ayatollah regime to decide if they will once again force him to take this action. It's looking more and more like that will happen, as the regime continues to act like they're doing the Americans a favor by talking to them, but also drawing red lines, declaring that their support for regional proxy terrorist groups and the ballistic missile program are not subjects that are open for discussion, because these things are none of America's business. They also reject overnight a demand for zero enrichment of uranium, saying it's their obvious right and a vital need of the state. And at the same time, they are also offering temptations, as deputy foreign ministers spoke about possible economic interests with the United States, including investments in energy and mining, joint oil and gas fields, and even purchasing of aircrafts. On the table also came up the possibility of a temporary freeze of enrichment for a period of up to 3 years and transferring parts of the stockpiles to a third country. But the American administration, according to the line that was presented, demands a complete halt to the enrichment and also wants to expand the talks beyond the nuclear issues to the very missiles and support for the proxy organizations in the region that Iranian diplomats keep saying they won't talk about. And here at TBN Israel, we are looking at that exact same picture but reaching a different conclusion. The assessment that arises from the discourse here is that the talks may reach a dead end, and therefore a strike option remains an available alternative. The IDF remains on high alert, and at the same time, additional situation assessments are planned to determine the level of readiness that is needed. Israel is also calling it by name: Iran's double diplomacy. In the discussion room, we hear messages about progress, but outside the room, we hear threats and watch drills that include the closure of the world's oil corridor for a few hours just to make a point. And one more point that cannot be ignored: Arakshi also declared on the international arena that Iran wants nuclear energy not for purposes of war, and that it has never thought about obtaining a nuclear weapon. But in Tehran, they broadcast that they are ready to defend themselves against any threat and warn that the consequences of any attack will not be limited to Iran's borders. It's the same duality, just in another language. The bottom line is that this day gave us one clear picture. Talks in Geneva are progressing on paper, but the sea in the Gulf is already speaking in a different voice. And now, after the Iranians were given 2 weeks to come back with answers, the clock starts ticking. What really stands behind these talks, and why is the regime in Tehran so insistent on buying time and not discussing their missiles and the proxies? For some insight into these questions, we will now turn to TBN Israel's senior Middle East analyst Mati Shoshani.
Yair asked me today what really happened in the second round of talks between the United States and Iran in Geneva. What's behind Iran's tactic of smiling at the table while keeping its fist raised? The clearest thing from this round is the gap between messages. On the one hand, Iran goes out with language like progress, positive direction, and principled understandings. On the other hand, early in the morning, the Supreme Leader delivers a direct threat towards the American military. And at the same time, Iran runs a military exercise in the Strait of Hormuz, including reports of missile launches and a temporary closure of parts of the strait for a few hours. That combination sends one very clear message. We're talking, but we're not coming in weak. The second round opened in Geneva with a very real scenario in the background. If there's no progress, the military option is on the table. On the American side, the envoys were Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. On the Iranian side, Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi. Oman served as the mediator. Now, in practice, these were indirect talks, with messages passed through the mediator. Everyone walked into this round with the same question: not only whether a deal is possible, but whether anyone is actually prepared to move off the red lines. While the delegations entered the diplomatic track, Tehran launched a parallel track of threats. All Khamenei spoke directly about American forces being sent into the region, saying Iran has the capacity and the capability to sink American ships and warning that the U.S. military could take a blow as severe it would not recover. Now, that's not diplomatic language. That's deterrence, delivered at the exact moment Washington is speaking about a possible agreement while also warning of the consequences of failure. At the same time, Iran activated the maritime arena. The Revolutionary Guards opened a drill in the Straits of Hormuz. Tehran presented it as a preparation for security and for military threats. Iranian media described the use of offensive and defensive systems and spoke about high precision. And then came the headline move. Parts of the straits would be closed for a few hours. The significance is obvious. Roughly 1/5 of the world's traded oil moves through that route. When Iran touches Hormuz, it touches the nerves of the global economy. And in that same window, the United States kept negotiations open, but thickened its posture. President Trump ordered a second aircraft carrier to the region. The Gerald Ford is on its way to join the Abraham Lincoln Carrier Group. And alongside that, American assets were repositioned closer to the Middle East, including air components. Now the picture is clear: diplomacy with a hand on the trigger. Now that brings us to the core issue, where movement is possible and where it isn't. Did you know you can invest in one of the world's most innovative economies, the nation of Israel, just as easily as you invest in American markets? That's why today I'm excited to introduce you to our friends and sponsors at Wise Money Israel, who I've personally known and trusted for many years. Their CEO and his family are longtime friends, and I trust them completely. Now, whether you're looking to elevate your 2026 investment strategy, diversify internationally, or support Israel and its economy, Wise Money Israel offers professional guidance to help you participate in one of the world's most dynamic markets. SEC-registered Wise Money Israel manages Israeli stock and bond accounts for investors from over 30 nations who want to capitalize on Israel's position as a global innovation powerhouse. Their Israel-based professionals provide expert access to companies in Israel's traditional and high-growth sectors. And as of today, Wise Money Israel manages about $100 million in client assets with integrity and biblical focus. If you're looking to fulfill your biblical mandate by supporting Israel, we highly recommend that you reach out to them. Click in the link description below or visit wisemoneyisrael.com/TBN for a free consultation today. Washington demands zero enrichment on Iranian soil, not limited enrichment, not a partial model. Tehran, meanwhile, stresses that enrichment is a red line. Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian said Iran will never abandon its nuclear program and insisted it's intended for peaceful purposes only. The second major gap, and the one that explains why Israel is sounding skeptical, is Iran's attempt to narrow the talks to a single file. Tehran wants the discussion to be the only thing about the nuclear issue. It rules out from the start any discussion of ballistic missiles or its supposed or support of regional proxies. Israel insists that any agreement must address the missiles and the proxy network. Prime Minister Netanyahu has repeated that any deal must include removing all enriched uranium from Iran, dismantling enrichment capabilities, and dealing with the ballistic missiles issue. Inside this framework comes the 2 weeks factor. At the end of the talks, it was said that Iran will return to about 2 weeks with detailed proposals on some of the gaps. That means no signature, no breakthrough, and a short window, and a demand for answers. So what did Iran say as the second round ended? Foreign Minister Araghchi struck an optimistic tone. He said the discussions were more serious than the previous round, that progress was made, that the sides reached understandings on several core principles, and that both sides will now work on language and draft formulations, exchange documents, and only then set a third round. He spoke about a new window of opportunity and said the path has begun. But he also admitted this doesn't mean a deal is close and that disagreements remain. Against that optimism, the field reality, or the reality on the ground, remains hard and harsh. On the same day Iran talked about a positive direction, it also issued threats, ran a military drill in the Straits of Hormuz and temporarily closed parts of it, and it kept the most sensitive issues outside of the negotiation room: the missile program and the proxy system, the very issues that Israel and Washington see as critical and central to this entire agreement. There's also another layer: Iran's economic pitch to the Americans. The message being floated is that an agreement should generate benefits for both sides, including American investment opportunities in energy and mining, shared oil and gas fields, and even aircraft purchases. It's part of Tehran's strategy: lift the sanctions, recognize enrichment, and will help create an interest that becomes harder to unwind. So when Yair asks why Iran is playing for time, this is the picture. Tehran comes to talks to buy time and reduce pressure without looking like it's folding. That's why it pairs diplomacy with power signals. Now, Washington keeps the door open, but builds a growing military envelope around the table. And in Jerusalem, they look at the deep gaps and the firm red lines and assess that the public optimism doesn't necessarily reflect the real state of the talks behind closed doors. Once again, I'm Mati Shoshani. Now back to Yair Pinto.
Okay, Mati, that explains a lot. Thank you very much. And if you want more information about what is happening in the Middle East, just search for Mati Shoshani on the different social media networks. And now, we will move to our next arena. But before that, do not forget to share our content with as many people as possible. Give a click on the subscribe button, and let's continue. In the last 24 hours, explosions were heard again in southern Lebanon as Israeli aircrafts hit ammunition warehouses and launchers. And at the same time, in the IDF, they talk about a sequence of strikes in recent days and a move to more systematic work against Hezbollah's key people on the ground. So, why is the pace of strikes rising now? And what is the IDF trying to prevent before the entire region enters a round against Iran? In the IDF, they declared on Tuesday that Lebanon is at the center of the attention and the activity, and defined it as a first threat cycle. According to the data provided, in recent days, dozens of strikes were carried out, and since the beginning of the month, 13 terrorists were eliminated from Hezbollah and also from Palestinian Islamic Jihad. The message is clear. Israel is not waiting for Hezbollah to complete its rehabilitation or a sign from Iran, but getting out ahead of the problem and moving first. And behind the scenes, in the defense establishment, they assess that Iran is advancing moves to rebuild the terrorist organizations in Lebanon, first and foremost Hezbollah, in order to position themselves as a firepower force that will challenge Israel if the United States attacks Iran. Therefore, in Division 91 of the IDF and the Northern Command, they are working to damage Hezbollah's ability to rebuild its force structure in southern Lebanon, not only by hitting weapons, but also those who operate them. As part of this method, in the IDF, they have identified Hezbollah's representatives in every location that are responsible for rehabilitating the organization's activities in that specific place, and they targeted them for termination. In parallel to the offensive activity, yesterday an unusual meeting was held in the field, including all the heads of the frontline communities, meeting with the commander of Division 91, Brigadier General Yuval Gaz. They hear from him about the strikes, about the preparations for the scenarios in which Iran will try to open through Hezbollah, another front from Lebanon against Israel. However, at this time, there is no change in the guidelines for the northern communities of Israel, the people, the civilians that live there in the north, close to the border. For the IDF, it is important to remain calm, but also to prepare mentally, because this can ignite the whole region very quickly and affect the northern communities of Israel. And meanwhile, on the negotiating table, a parallel track is being conducted. Regional forces are leading negotiations to achieve a security agreement between Israel and Lebanon, with clear American interests in promoting a broader arrangement. According to reports, the discussion is based on an idea that was previously proposed by Egypt, dismantling Hezbollah's weapons by force, which is defined as impossible because of the risk of civil war and chaos in Lebanon. Therefore, they propose an alternative: understandings with Hezbollah on a commitment not to carry out any military action against Israel, and at the same time understanding with the Lebanese army around managing the warehouses and its weapons north of the Litani River, with an American guarantee for Israel's commitment to the ceasefire. The Americans, according to those reports, want to raise the level of dialogue between Israel and Lebanon from a military level to a civilian level. And within Lebanon itself, the commander of the Lebanese army, Rudolf Hakial, presented a flexible formula for collecting illegal weapons north of the Litani River, with a long timeline of 4 to 8 months, and perhaps more, without a deadline. Predictably, Hezbollah responded with a defiant statement to President Joseph Aoun of Lebanon, to Prime Minister Nawaf Salam, also of Lebanon, and to the army commander: "We will not hand over a single bullet north of the Litani River." Furthermore, Hezbollah Secretary General Naim Qassem already says that the current situation cannot continue, and leaves it up to everyone's imagination what he intends to try and do about this situation that is very complicated. And here at TBN Israel, we will continue to report on these historic events moving forward, so please share this content with as many people as possible. Follow us on social media, and above all, hit that subscribe button so that you never miss another episode of Boots on the Ground. And now, we are shifting our focus to the Gaza Strip, where the combat team of Brigade 7 of the IDF, under the command of the Gaza Division 143, operated over the past 24 hours in the Yellow Line area, locating a weapons cache that was intended to be used by Hamas terrorists from the Rafah Brigade. So, why is this happening on the eve of Ramadan, the Muslim month? And what is Hamas planning for the coming month while the area is so-called quiet only on paper? The IDF says that the forces will continue to operate and to eliminate the terrorists, to continue and destroy underground infrastructure, and clear the area, and in accordance with the agreement, they remain deployed and will remove any immediate threat. But what is felt on the ground is a gap, because alongside the IDF's activities on the Yellow Line, Hamas is working in parallel to create internal control and to preserve its military capabilities. This week, Hamas's police mechanism is deploying in vital areas across the Gaza Strip ahead of Ramadan, establishing a presence at markets, main streets, key intersections, and mosques. Their goal, so they say, is to organize daily life and maintain a calm atmosphere for civilians. In practice, this is just a way to signal to everyone that they're still in charge and tighten their grip on the ground. At the operations and the communications headquarters of the mechanism, they announced that the deployment also includes an investigations department that will increase oversight over the markets, the malls, and the shops. They spoke about managing availability, validity, and prices of goods, and about preventing fraud and exploitation. They also spoke about planning patrols during peak hours after the noon prayer until sunset to ease the movement and to prevent congestion. In parallel, they are placing additional intervention and order-keeping forces to reinforce the mechanism. This is civilian language, but it is organizational power, and this is Ramadan under a regime of terrorism. And behind the scenes, researchers of the Palestinian arena warn not to be confused by the relative quiet, saying that there is no real quiet in Gaza. There are terrorists who go out, others who approach the Yellow Line and the IDF's areas, and the area is teeming with activities. And according to their assessment, the motivations and the ideology in Gaza have not changed. They are not talking about sobering up, but the opposite. Hamas continues to say it will keep its weapons, that its struggle is just, and that October 7 was very important for the movement, very important event. Therefore, for them, this period is a time for organization and for rearmament. The assessments speak about collecting weapons and ammunitions, about smuggling of all kinds, both by drones and also by trucks, and also about an attempt to achieve effective control over the population while the civilian system functions partially. And in the same breath, they mentioned a troubling finger. So far, about 20% of the tunnels in Gaza have been dismantled, and in Hamas's hands, there is a wide variety of weapons, from missiles and rockets to drones and up to light weapons. The observations of Brigade 7 of the IDF on the ground confirms all of this. And furthermore, the political arena, Hamas continues to project a consistent line. It is not disarming. Senior Hamas figure Muhammad Mardawi even claimed in the past 24 hours that no official message was received from any party regarding a 60-day deadline for dismantling weapons. He also complained about threats without a basis in negotiations and claimed that carrying out the threat would have dangerous consequences and that the Palestinians will not raise a white flag. And at the same time, a Hamas delegation led by Khalil El-Haya is in Cairo now in talks with senior officials in Egyptian intelligence, while Hamas also speaks about storage of weapons or freezing or non-use and non-display of weapons, and so on. These are all code words that point to just one thing. Hamas wants to preserve its ability to commit acts of terror against Israelis in the future. Within the organization itself, another move is taking place these days. Hamas is preparing to announce very soon its new leadership for a period of 1 year. And according to the reports, the internal elections were completed in Gaza and are awaiting results in the branches abroad. And the main contest is between Khalil El-Haya and Khaled Mashal. The new leadership is supposed to fill a vacuum created after the elimination of many senior figures in Hamas, including Yahya Sinwar in the Gaza Strip and Ismail Haniyeh outside of Gaza, and also replace the temporary management model of a small leadership council. So, while Hamas places police in markets and in mosques, talks about civilian order, and advances new leadership, the IDF continues to find weapons that are intended to harm our forces and our civilians. The question that remains open is how long is it possible to hold these two worlds together before Ramadan turns from a test of public order into a security test. So keep spreading the truth, follow us, because inside the Gaza Strip, even when it seems quiet, the ground is already preparing for the next round of fighting. Also, keep spreading the truth, because we need your help. We need your help to tell people what's happening in Israel, and then to pray for the situation. Pray for those people that are affected by all these terrorist regimes. If it's the Palestinian people, people in Syria, Lebanon, pray for the people of Iran to have a better future. Pray for them. They need it very, very much now. The numbers that are coming out of Iran are enormous, and the things that this regime did to its own people are just unbelievable. So pray for them. And keep praying for the peace of Jerusalem.
Hello, this is Mati here in Jerusalem with TBN Israel.
This is Yair Pinto from TBN Israel here in Jerusalem. TBN Israel is keeping viewers informed with Israel-focused news, culture, and what God is doing in this land.
Support TBN Israel today online at tbn.org/Israel. Thank you.